Okay, here we go. So this is the third of these little lectures, again on the Nash article about Coca-Cola and Chiapas. And I'll fill in a little detail here. So one, uh, as we know, Chiapas was really the last part of Mexico to be completely dominated by the Mexican central government. Uh, it's rather remote, or it has been rather remote. It's sort of mountainous. It has places where, in the past, certainly villages and villagers could be kind of isolated. Now, I'll return to the subject of alcohol for a moment. Uh, all of Chiapas had ancient pre-Christian uses of alcohol in various of their religions. Of course, the alcohol they were using was actually rather weak because they didn't use distillation. Distillation is the thing, of course, that makes alcohol really, really strong. So they were using relatively mild forms of alcohol in their rituals. And then with the arrival of Christianity and a whole different set of rituals to be observed. Also, what came in was distillation, and initially people were distilling rum, and they were doing it in their own homes and so forth. Now, actually, this began to set up as the decades moved along and the state and the federal government of Mexico began to have a stronger hold in Chiapas. This set up a kind of conflict because people were making kind of home brew, shall we say, home brewed distilled alcohol in their own homes. And that meant, of course, that the government wasn't able to get the taxes on it that they might have wanted to get, and also that the large distilling producers were not making the profits that they wanted to make. So what happened was there were several periods during which the Mexican police and even the army were sent into Chiapas to try to uproot this kind of local distilling, or what we would call in the States moonshining types of operations, and shut them down and so forth. And this kind of conflict, as well as other things, did not leave people in the state with a particularly nice attitude about government in general. And we don't have time to get involved too much in it, but you'll see that Nash mentions in this regard the Zapatista movement, which is a movement for autonomy in Chiapas that has been active for a number of decades. It's always been actually pretty peaceful, and it's an interesting movement, and it really is kind of animated by its hostility toward the central government. And hostility toward the central government is furthermore kind of stoked, or fueled by the fact that in Chiapas people have felt either neglected on the one hand or given too much attention on the other hand, as when the police or the army comes raiding and looking for illegal moonshine operations. Okay, now back to alcohol specifically. By the middle of the 20th century, a lot of people in Chiapas had been noticing that they did have actually a rather big alcohol problem. People were using a lot of very strong alcohol at weddings, at baptisms, at confirmation things, at godparent types of rituals, and it was really becoming a problem, and local people began to recognize it. And this, this, as I say, began to be recognized. Nash points this out on page 627, where she says, drinking was institutionalized in virtually every celebration within the home as well as in the church and the town hall. That, by the way, is an example of sort of traditionalization, isn't it? People taking traditions in this case Christianity, but then also forms of goods, in this case alcohol, and pulling them into their own culture. But in this case, it was creating kind of a problem, even though it was also intricately wound up in the local culture, with, for instance, liquor being considered to be a gift of Jesus, actually. Now, as I say, this very high consumption of liquor, really we see in the middle of the 20th century getting more and more. And the new religious leaders of Protestant movements, who of course were trying to convert people, obviously naturally went along with the that was a little bird of mine, a pet, flying around the room. Naturally, this fit in with the interests of the Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola people, who, upon hearing it, they really began to push a lot, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And sure enough, Coke and Pepsi began to be served instead of cane liquor or rum at these religious ceremonies. So this is actually part, at least, of the local growth of those two big global corporations, at least in southern Mexico, which is, an interesting kind of global and local cultural set of interactions. Meanwhile, what else is going on? Bottling companies, of course, they not only bottle Pepsi and Coke, they actually bottle water, don't they? I mean, they just buy water, they put it in a bottle, and then they sell it back to you. And what that means is that very large corporations, bottling corporations, don't have much interest in public water infrastructure, which is one of the things, remember, that we said was so important in moving forward in the second epidemiological transition, for instance. Public piped water has always been very important, and it's always been free. But if water begins to be sold in bulk in bottles, then the people who are bottling it, they don't have much interest in supporting that kind of public enterprise. And in this regard, for instance, Nash mentions that one of the national laws in Mexico that was put together during Vicente Fox's presidency of Mexico had to do with denationalizing water, or allowing water to be privatized, or allowing water rights, including subsurface water rights, to be purchased, bought and sold. And so, by the way, this is where it becomes relevant that Vicente Fox was at one time very, he was the chief executive officer of the operations for Coca-Cola in the area. So you can see this nexus of private business, corporate business and politics, and so forth. So, I'll end there. I think that's all we need to go over in regard to the Nash article. But Nash concludes also by saying that, or reminding us, that this kind of water problem, whether or not it's interestingly mixed up culturally and religiously as it is in Chiapas, this kind of water problem, with water being privatized and sold back to people in bottles and so forth, it's a worldwide problem, and we can find examples of it all over the world. And actually, increasingly, anthropologists are doing work on exactly this kind of thing. Okay, so I'll post this one, and then we'll move on from there. Remember, after this article, right, there's only one more article that I want to talk about. and that is the article called Following the Flaps. That's about lamb flaps being sold in Melanesia and Polynesia, and that's the last article that will show up on any kind of test or final. Okay, ciao. See you shortly.